My show is The Women's Connection. The Women's Connection is a program about women who've had challenges and obstacles in their lives. But more important, it's what they've done about it. Our guest today has had challenges. One happened in law school involving her professor that I'm sure everybody's come across at one time in their lives. Very concerned about making law available for the middle-income individual, she has built a successful law practice and started a family in her late 30s. Let us welcome Gail Koff and hear about her life experiences so far. Welcome, Gail. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Now, you went to law school in 1967 and you graduated in 1970. How did it feel to be the only woman in your law class?
Well, when I went to law school, there were two other women in my class.
Oh.
And it was before women, a few years before women were going to law and in any kind of numbers, and certainly it's very satisfying to see law schools 50% women now. It didn't actually feel particularly different to me because I had three older brothers in my family, and I was used to being around a lot of men, and I just sort of didn't pay that much attention to it particularly.
But one day you had an incident with your professor where he singled you out in a...
Well, the first time I was called on in law school, the professor said to me, "Well, Ms. Koff, will you please stand up so we can all see the dimensions of this case?"
How did you feel?
Well, I just laughed and I stood up and I said I'd be delighted. Now, in today's world, a professor never would do that, and probably I should have stood up and said, "Well, I'll sue you. You can't talk to me like that." But basically, I was just trying to get through school, and I developed actually a very good relationship with that particular professor. But
that's quite nice.
We have all developed a lot more awareness of these kind of issues and how women have been treated. I mean, there are lots and lots of stories about women in business school, women in law school in the early days where there was Ladies' Day in law school and professors didn't call on women except for one day a month or something like that. And
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and really there have been unbelievable changes in a lot of ways when you think about how women were treated 20, 25 years ago, and how they couldn't even find jobs. Actually, I was just reading last night, and I think Forbes magazine was talking about the first 5 or 6 or 7 women who were accepted at Harvard Business School, and what happened to each of them, and how really only one out of, maybe it was 8 or 9 women, stayed in the business world and has had a successful career. Almost all the women left. Many of them raised families. 1 or 2 had difficult emotional situations. But the pressure on women 20 or 30 years ago to, really even just 20 years ago, 25 years ago, to be trying to do something in a man's world was a lot different than it is today. I think we all still have a lot of miles to go, but there have been improvements.
Well, you're like the forefront and the groundbreaking and the feminism movement as far as getting people to recognize you as an equal, which is always very difficult, I would say, in anything, in any type of business, whether it was law or climbing the corporate ladder. Mm-hmm. Well, when you went to Washington, you also said that you wanted to move on to Washington. You found that another challenge?
Well, I thought that maybe I wanted to go into politics, which is why I went to Washington, D.C. for law school. But after I lived in Washington, I saw that I wasn't really cut out for politics. Really, unfortunately, because I think there are a lot of good people in politics, but you really have to have a big ego and a real drive for power, which I don't particularly have. And as it turns out, I discovered that I'm more of an entrepreneur than really a lawyer, even. And so that when I started Jacoby & Myers, I felt like running a business was sort of the right thing to me. And in a way, I felt like I kind of come home to who I was and what my skills were, yeah.
Okay, because just going back to the sexual harassment or discrimination, whatever you want. With the Anita Hill controversy happened several years ago, do you find that more women are coming out and talking about it more and making it the public aware of it and just handling it a lot different than before?
Well, yeah, I think we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to Anita Hill because she brought the issue smack out there for everybody to look at and argue about and debate about, and she was tremendously courageous. And I think the issue is definitely out there now, and I think men are confused about how to deal with women in some ways, and I think women are a little bit confused about what their rights are and what to expect, but the issue is certainly on the table.
What exactly is a professional definition of sexual harassment?
Well, the definition, I mean, there are a couple of different areas that you have to be concerned with, and I certainly am not a expert in sexual discrimination law, but the sort of hallmark of what you need to look at is whether there is a hostile environment that has been created by actions or words of males, actually, that impact on the woman. I mean, now what does that mean, and how do you describe it, and what happens, and but that's the basic kind of definition now.
Okay, so it's like if somebody makes an advance to you in an unpleasant way and you say no, and how do you educate somebody to say, hey, back off? You know, their egos are involved. They want to, you know, they're after you to make you either uncomfortable, to hit on you for whatever reason.
Right.
What do you say to a man who's hitting on you in an unflattering way, whether it's your boss, a coworker, or somebody that you just meet?
Well, you say no.
Just say
you
no.
Just say no, where you just say that's inappropriate, and you have to communicate that to whoever is in your direct superior in your company, and the person needs to be spoken to, because the company where there's a problem is in the end also responsible for the actions of its employees. So we actually at our firm have started doing some advertisements on sexual harassment to really educate the public about what the issues are and what they should do if they have felt it in the workplace. And you know, we want people to be able to feel that they can call Jacoby and Myers about that kind of a problem and get some advice and get an explanation and get information about what their rights are. I'm actually, you know, I've done a number of books, and I've written a number of books, and I am seriously considering writing one on sexual harassment and also age discrimination, because I think those are two really big, important areas in our country now, and I think it's hard to, and I think people need more information about them, and they need to feel that they're not alone, really.
Well, that's good, because you always feel like you're being singled out. You feel like it's you, and you become paranoid, and you know, people say, oh no, he's not, he's just kidding, but you're offended by it and you just don't know how to keep saying no, and after a while it gets pretty you know, stressful, you know, when you're trying to say no politely and not get their ego out of shape. And I was just reading, the New York Times had an article also about children in high school, and it started with Title IX, where it was basically about children, for women being able to play the sports and everything else, and now it's extending to really carry over to protect the women or the girls in high school about unwanted advances from men or males at that age.
I actually think that's an important area. I bet we have just seen the tip of the iceberg of those kinds of cases, because I think there's a lot of abuses going on in high schools that we're not aware of, and that the girls, I mean, adults don't even know how to deal with it in the workplace. So you can imagine how young women who are 15, 16, 17 deal with the issue, and then they go to their parents, and their parents don't really know how to deal with that. I actually have some good friends whose daughter had a problem in high school. This was a few years ago, and my friend is a therapist, and I mean, they're very strong-willed, educated people, and they handled the situation beautifully. But most people don't want to confront it. They actually spoke to other girls in the class who had also been really somewhat harassed by this teacher, and several of the other parents didn't want to make it waves. They didn't want their daughter's grades to be affected. I mean, my friends were appalled because this one teacher had really been very overreaching in terms of dealing with the girls.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, so it's a tough issue. It's a real tough issue.
Everybody's got to grapple with it, you know. Well, there's my grades. It's kind of like the same thing with a work situation.
Right,
and it just carries on. You don't want your
Exactly.
job jeopardized. You want your raise. You want your money. You want everything else. But how do you handle it when somebody's making unwanted advances?
Right.
And it
Well,
starts
clearly the law is on people's side now, on women's side. And so women have to stand up now. They cannot. They have to stand up, and they have to get help, and they have to get support, and they have to say no.
Well, I know Jacoby and Myers has been the groundbreaker in television and radio advertising, and I'm glad to see that you're doing all these public services too, as far as educating people to say no, to say, hey, you know, you've got rights, you're an individual,
Right.
and it's like, now's my time to do this whole thing.
Right.
You know, and I think it's marvelous. You've also, you know, you were a groundbreaker in radio and television. You were the groundbreaker in age discrimination, sexual harassment, and you're doing fraud cases also. And
We're starting to do some consumer fraud cases, yes.
so
Yeah,
you're really the groundbreaker.
Using, you know, lawyer advertising has been somewhat controversial. It's not so controversial anymore, although I think there's still, our clients have always liked lawyer advertising. I think it's been most controversial with other attorneys.
They're just jealous that they didn't think of it first.
Right. But the consumer of legal services in today's world is much more educated than they were 20 years ago when we first started. I actually spoke the other day before a commission on, you know, making law available to the middle-income person or something, and I said, you know, the consumer, I wouldn't worry so much about the middle-income person now. You have probably more information, too much information about legal services and the availability of attorneys and clients now. You know, 20 years ago I told people they should shop around, they shouldn't go to a divorce lawyer if they have a personal injury case, or if they have a real estate closing, they have got to go to somebody who's got experience in that particular type of matter. And clients now come to our firm all the time, shopping around, they want a second opinion.
Just like the medical profession.
And we encourage that, and that kind of thing didn't exist 20 years ago. People wouldn't talk about fees. They were too nervous to ask a lawyer about fees. You've got a much more aware, educated public, and the public has more choice. Lawyers are still, unfortunately, not liked very much, and I think that's a shame, because I think in general, your average attorney out there is really trying very hard to help you as the client, and most attorneys are really very dedicated and very competent. You've got a few people who aren't, and the average attorney in New York State earns under $40,000 a year. Most attorneys are not making, you know, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a way we hear about with the large New York firms. That's a small portion of attorneys. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about attorneys. So I wish that the reputation of attorneys was better than it is, but maybe if we keep working, some day it will get there.
Well, you've done a lot so far to educate the public yourself. I mean, setting into place at Jacoby and Myers the broken down fee structure, which I think is excellent, because I know when I get a bill, I want to know what I'm paying for. I just don't want to say lawyer services $400. Well, what did that include? You know, I like to
Right.
see things written down.
Right.
And you were a groundbreaker in that.
Well, also the competition, you know, when I worked in a general practice firm, which was where I started in New York, we charged, and it was a nice general practice firm with, you know, offices in Midtown. We charged $1,500 for an uncontested divorce. Now that was like 25 years ago. Jacoby and Myers today charges $980 about for an uncontested divorce.
Things have
So
come
here
down.
you are 25 years later, where you're paying less for a service than 25 years ago. Same thing with bankruptcies. Bankruptcies were maybe about $1,000 for a straight bankruptcy, and today it's in the 700 ranges. You can find somebody who works from his home and get one for 400. You got to be sure they know what they're doing. But so the competition has definitely been good for the consumer.
Well, that's good to hear, because everything's escalating. So
Right.
it's nice to know something's
Right.
going down,
Exactly.
unfortunately for you, but
Right.
unfortunately for us as a
That's right.
consumer.
I actually had a call from a reporter a few months ago, and he said, you know, I've been looking at the Consumer Price Index, and legal fees are the only things that have gone down. Do you have anything to say about that? And I said, I most certainly do. And I can, you know, but you don't hear that side of the story in the
Right.
news. You really don't.
Well, we've said it now here
Right.
for everybody to hear.
Right.
Along with, you've also written some books.
Yes, I've written a number of books. Love and the Law, The Practical Guide, Jacoby Myers' Practical Guide to Personal Injury, the Jacoby Myers Practical Guide to Everyday Law, books on
If somebody wants to,
bankruptcy and small claims, and
if
a
somebody
number
wants to
of
get,
books.
I'm sorry, if somebody wants to get hold of the book, how would they do that?
Well, if you come into one of our offices and become a client, you would get a copy, or Simon & Schuster. They're published by Simon & Schuster, so and they're in the bookstores. You know, I've written a couple of them 4 or 5, 6 years ago. I don't know, some of them aren't in the bookstores anymore. I think Love and the Law, which is sort of everything to do, and the Practical Guide to Everyday Law are still in the bookstores. But
Oh, that's good to hear.
somebody could call us up, and if they really wanted one, we'd send them a copy.
In the midst of all this, you got married, started a family, and you had your first child at 37, and the last child at 44.
Right.
Now, that's also another accomplishment, because at 44, having children, people are trying to settle down, have their kids and go to college, and here you're just starting out. Do you find this a different type of an obstacle, a challenge, or how do you feel starting it late in life versus early in life?
Right. Well, you know, you only know really what you're used to. Actually, I was just reading a book review last night of Gail Sheehy's book on Passages or something, and there is a phenomena of more women having children later.
Right.
I think if you've focused on your career the way I did, I mean, it was not possible for me to, I wasn't interested in marriage. I wasn't really particularly interested in men. I mean, I was interested in men, but I certainly didn't want to get married because I was so focused on, for whatever reason, becoming a lawyer. And I was sort of a child of the 60s, and I was going to save the world and
You're still
try
saving
to
the world.
make law available to everybody. You know, I got sort of stuck in this idea. And so I wasn't really ready to sort of settle down and start a family. And I actually wasn't even sure I wanted children. But, you know, I got married, and you figured, well, you're married, you gotta have a kid. And then when I had my first child, I just thought it was the best, most wonderful thing ever. And then we had a second child, and I really tried to talk myself out of having a third child, but I just had this child like sitting in me, and I went to a therapist. You know, why do I want a third child? I have a boy and a girl, and you know, but I couldn't do it. So we were very fortunate, and I had a third child, and she was actually, I traveled until my 8th month of pregnancy, and I worked until the day before I've had each of my children. No, I loved being pregnant. I think if you're involved and like what you're doing, having children is, you know, you do need some luck, but because you can have health problems. But it was just a wonderful surprise to me how much I loved having children.
What advice would you give to somebody starting a family in the later years of their life? Not that you're old and gray.
Right. Well, I am gray.
But I mean, you know what I mean, not like at 50s, 60s or something like
right.
that.
Well, I would just say go with your heart. I think if you go with your heart, you're always right.
Intuitive, woman's
right,
intuition and
right,
stuff. But
right.
how do you maintain a healthy lifestyle? I mean, you're so involved. You got 3 children, a husband, 3 children, a business. You're writing books. You're traveling. How do you do it?
Well, I think you have to. I think there are a few things. I think you have to decide what your priorities are.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to keep your life simple. And you have to have a sense of humor. I'd say those 3 kind of top things that come to mind. I think that in terms of priorities, you know, I have good friends I don't get to see enough. I don't have as much of a social life as I would like because there's only a certain amount of time and only a certain amount of attention that, at least that I have and that I can kind of cope with. And I think you have to focus really on what's important and not get, you know, not get carried away with things that really don't matter to you. At least that's the only way I've been able to do it in terms of, you know, complicating your life with a lot of material things that take time and pleasure away from spending time with your children and being with your husband. And
they grow up so
yeah,
fast.
they grow up very fast. And my husband and I have a commuter marriage, so we don't live together all the time, which works for us.
I was going to say.
Probably wouldn't work for everybody, but it does work for us. And, you know, our son is almost 13, and, you know, by 13, as far as I can tell, they're gone. You know, he's got his friends. I mean, I'm lucky if I get 5 sentences from him a night, you know, between the
Wait till he gets his
phone
driver's license.
Right, right. So it's really a very short period of time.
You're doing it all. Do you keep a health regimen as far as an exercise program? Or?
I do. I'm very committed to physical kind of good health, just because if my body isn't in shape, everything kind of collapses for me. I need to feel good, and I need to exercise, because otherwise I don't have the energy to kind of get through the day. So I live in a building that has a swimming pool, so I usually, which is great, and I've lived there forever, really, because the apartment has a swimming pool and a garage, and so those are that's what I mean by keeping it simple, you know. Those are, I can get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, I can go for a swim, come back up, change, have breakfast with my kids, and then I drive them to school.
That's lovely.
So that's a nice little morning routine that, you know, gives me a little extra time with the kids, lets me stay in touch with their school a little bit, and, you know, has been useful. And so swimming, and I do a lot of yoga, which has also been very helpful, and kind of keeps me moving, you know.
You do yoga, you swim, you drive your kids to school, and you have a law practice.
You know, I was putting my makeup on in the car a few weeks ago, and the man next to me drove up in the car next to me, and he saw me putting on my makeup, which I don't wear particularly a lot of makeup anyway, but he said, "You must be one of these time-deprived people." I know, it was great.
That's true. If you had more time, what would you do?
Oh,
because you also are on a committee of 200 women.
Well, that's women business owners. If I had more time, I'd take courses about music and art, and I do yoga every day, and I'd go to a health club every day, and I'd read more.
That sounds like a great
nice.
life. It
yeah,
certainly
it
does.
It sounds good.
Well, at least if you have a vacation with the kids, do you go sit on the beach or something like that and just chill out, or just?
Well, it depends. I love the beach. My husband doesn't. So, sometimes we like to explore and travel. We have family in Europe, so now that the kids are a little older, we like to be with them a little bit, and it just depends. And in another few years, they're probably not going to want to come with us at all. So
Right, take advantage while
Right.
it's going on.
Right.
What do your kids think of you being so active?
I don't know. You know, I'm the only mother they've ever had. My son actually said to me a few months ago, which surprised me. He said to me, "You're like the ever-ready." You know that
The
little
battery?
rabbit that goes across
Right.
the. He said, "You never stop," and I'd laugh because I don't really particularly think of myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
My little one says she wishes I were a house mom.
Uh-huh. Well, that's normal for any child
And
whose mother's working.
right, except my middle daughter, who's 11, says she's happy that I'm not around because
'cause
I'd be annoying her too much. And I agree with her. I think that they're better off that I'm not around. So it's hard to know. I think that if you're happy and involved in what you're doing and your kids see that, it's better for them, then it's the best thing for them.
As long as you're
if they
happy.
see you, doing something productive and being constructive and finding good time to be with them. I think if they feel that you're not involved or you don't care, that's not so good. But
Well, the fact that you're with them every morning to get them off to school, you take them to school, it's
Yeah, but
really the quiet, productive, quality time. That's what I'm looking for.
yeah, who knows?
Uh-huh.
I mean,
The
my
jury's
little
still
one says to me, right, the jury's still out. My little one says to me, "Well, you never pick me up." I say, "Well, I take you to school." Well,
Laura's
mother picks her up, and and they know, they
Right.
know how to press your buttons, and
Right.
and.
Do you find it difficult being, from the way the teachers perceive you, do they perceive you any different than they would if you were a younger mother in your early 20s? They figure you've got all the wisdom and they want to tap into you for all your wisdom?
I don't have a clue.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. And there are, I don't think of myself as older, particularly. Although I had to give a speech at Columbia Business School a couple of months ago, and it sort of sunk in. I mean, I looked out to the audience, and here were all these young 25-year-old, 26-year-old MBAs, and in my mind's eye, I'm sort of still 25 or 26.
Of course you are.
So I sort of said to them, I'm really depressed having been, being here, because looking out at the audience, I realized that I'm a 50-year-old mother of 3 children. I'm not a 25-year-old MBA sitting out there. So every so often the reality of my life seeps into my consciousness, but I try to keep it at bay.
Well, I always say, I'm not getting older, I'm getting better.
Right. Right.
And that's what we are. We're
Right.
not getting older. It's
Right.
a state of mind.
Right.
And when people
Well,
think about that.
I do think that's true. And I do think that, there's a lot of literature coming out now that, we're living so much longer that 50
It's nothing.
is the
The best
prime of
time.
your life.
Exactly.
Right.
Gail, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. If they want to get hold of you, how can they get hold of you at Jacoby & Myers?
Jacoby & Myers, yeah, we have an 800 number, 1-800-97-LEGAL.
Oh, that's great.
Or we're in the yellow pages, of course, or white pages.
Okay.
We're in the white pages.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It was wonderful having Gail Koff from Jacoby & Myers joining us. And if you have problems juggling your time, just think of Gail and what she's been doing. So thank you for joining us. I would like to hear from you. Please write me, because it's because of people like you that keep people like me on the air. I can be written to at The Woman's Connection, Post Office Box 918, New York, New York 10023. Thank you.